At 8213 West Somerdale Avenue in an unincorporated part of Norwood Park Township, a house contained a secret. The crawl space was not for storage, but for disposal. It was a burial ground, holding the remains of young men. The owner of the house was...
Hey, I'm Kevin, and I hope you enjoy our video today. Leave a like, subscribe, and enjoy. Today's story...
John Wayne Gacy, a building contractor, and a Democratic precinct captain who performed at children's events as Pogo the Clown. This is the record of how a man built a graveyard under his own home, operating without detection for 6 years. John Wayne Gacy was born in Chicago, Illinois, on March 17, 1942. His father, John Stanley Gacy, an auto mechanic and World War I veteran, was an alcoholic who subjected his son to physical abuse, often with a razor strap. He referred to his son as a sissy and a failure, instilling a sense of inadequacy. At school, Gacy was alienated and bullied. At age 11, a swing set accident resulted in a head injury. A blood clot formed in his brain and went untreated for years, causing blackouts until he was 16. After dropping out of high school, Gacy moved to Las Vegas, where he found work as a mortuary assistant. He was permitted to sleep at the funeral home, where he would undress and lie with the male corpses. The constant abuse from his father may have contributed to his later actions. Gacy's psychological profile shows traits consistent with psychopathy: superficial charm, a grandiose sense of self, pathological lying, and an absence of empathy or remorse. He constructed a public life of normalcy. He married Marlynn Myers, had 2 children, and became a prominent figure in his local JC's civic group in Waterloo, Iowa. This was a double life. In 1968, he was arrested for sodomy involving a 15-year-old employee, Donald Voorhees. Gacy even paid another teenager to assault Voorhees to prevent him from testifying. He was convicted and sentenced to 10 years at the Anamosa State Penitentiary. His wife divorced him while he was incarcerated. Through manipulation of the prison system, he secured parole in just 18 months. He returned to the Chicago area, where his mother helped him buy the house on Somerdale Avenue. He established a contracting business, PDM Contractors, an acronym for painting, decorating, and maintenance. He remarried in 1972. The façade was rebuilt. The first known murder occurred on January 3, 1972. Gacy lured 16-year-old Timothy McCoy to his home from a Greyhound bus station. Gacy stated an altercation occurred in which McCoy produced a knife. Gacy then stabbed McCoy to death. He later claimed he experienced a mind-numbing sensation while observing McCoy die. He buried the body in the dirt-floored crawl space under his house, pouring concrete over the burial site. The killings were sporadic at first, but after his second divorce was finalized in March 1976, Gacy had the house to himself, and the frequency of his attacks escalated. He targeted young men and teenage boys, runaways, individuals seeking employment, and hitchhikers. Many were hired through his business, PDM Contractors, a company that by 1978 had an annual turnover of over $200,000. He used different methods to get them to his house, sometimes impersonating a police officer or promising work. Once inside, the trap was set. His primary method was the handcuff trick. He would demonstrate a trick, cuffing his own hands, and then releasing them with a hidden key. When the victim was restrained, Gacy would sexually assault and torture them. The torture sometimes lasted for hours and could include forcing victims to ingest drain cleaner, dripping hot wax on them, or using a homemade rack. The murders were almost always carried out by strangulation. He used a rope tourniquet, a method he learned in the Boy Scouts. In a 1992 jailhouse interview with journalist Walter Jacobson, he demonstrated the technique, which he called the rope trick. He would wrap a rope twice around the victim's neck, insert a stick or hammer handle, and then twist it to tighten the ligature. He stated victims would sometimes convulse for an hour or two before dying. The crawl space became a mass grave. As the number of victims increased, he dug trenches and began stacking the bodies, sometimes multiple layers deep. He poured quicklime and charcoal over them to manage the worsening smell of decomposition. When the crawl space was filled with 26 bodies, he buried 3 more victims in other parts of his yard, including under the garage floor and patio. His last 4 known victims were weighted down and thrown into the nearby Des Plaines River. For 6 years, law enforcement did not connect the numerous missing persons reports to the contractor on Summerdale Avenue. That changed on December 11, 1978. A 15-year-old honor student named Robert Peast disappeared after telling his family he was going to meet with a contractor named John Gacy about a summer job. Unlike many of Gacy's previous victims, who were often runaways or estranged from their families, Piest had a close family who knew exactly where he was supposed to be. They reported him missing to the Des Plaines police, providing Gacy's name and address. A missing person was now directly linked to him. During an initial search of Gacy's home on December 13th, investigators found items belonging to other missing young men, including a class ring from a 19-year-old who had vanished in 1977. Gacy was placed under 24-hour surveillance. During this period, Gacy would taunt the officers following him, and on one occasion invited 2 detectives, including Officer Robert Schultz, back to his house. During the visit, an officer used the bathroom. The furnace kicked on, and a putrid odor came through a heating vent from the crawl space below. The officer later described the smell as that of decomposing bodies. This observation, combined with other evidence, provided police with what they needed for a final, more thorough search warrant. On December 21, 1978, investigators returned to the house with a new warrant and went to the crawl space. A member of the evidence team soon struck human bone with a shovel. The excavation that followed unearthed the remains of 26 young men and boys in various states of decomposition, some reduced to skeletons, others in a state of adipocere. The bodies were intermingled and layered. 3 more were found buried in the yard and under the garage. Confronted with the evidence, Gacy began to confess on December 22nd. In a statement that lasted for hours, he admitted to killing dozens, at times speaking of himself in the third person as John. He drew a detailed map for investigators showing where each body was buried in the crawl space. His trial began on February 6, 1980. The defense argued that he was not guilty by reason of insanity. The prosecution argued the acts were premeditated. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding him guilty on all 33 counts of murder on March 12, 1980. He was sentenced to death the following day. Gacy spent the next 14 years on death row, where he gained further notoriety for his paintings, producing over 2,000 canvases. Many depicted clowns, skulls, and historical figures like Elvis and Charles Manson. On May 10, 1994, he was executed by lethal injection at the Stateville Correctional Center. For his final meal, he requested fried shrimp, a bucket of KFC chicken, French fries, and a pound of strawberries. When asked for any last words, he reportedly said, "Kiss my ass." John Wayne Gacy used a public persona of community involvement to commit the murders of at least 33 young men and boys. His lack of remorse persisted until his execution. The story is not entirely over. Renewed efforts using modern DNA technology have led to the identification of victims including William Bundy, James Hakinson, and Francis Wayne Alexander. To this day, 5 of his victims remain unidentified, leaving their families without resolution.
Hey, I'm Kevin, and I hope you enjoy our video today. Leave a like, subscribe,